Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, a Cadence independent media production. If you're just joining us, what we do here is tips and tricks and hacks and tuning and tone and myth busting, which is what we're doing today. We're going to talk about whether or not mounting your rack tom on your bass drum versus someplace else affects the tone of either of them or both. Now, one of my favorite things about getting to be hosting this show and talking to everyone out there is the talking to everyone out there who checks us out and gives us ideas or concerns or thoughts about what they run into, what they've heard, things people have told them, stuff like that. This is one of those things that I actually had never really thought about that much other than a couple of things that had been told to me over the years. And I was really excited to kind of jump into it and see what's going to happen. Thanks again, as always, to our presenting sponsor, ProMark by D'Addario, for helping us out. We are doing Rebound Balance Acorn 5A Oak today to get a little extra aggressive into the toms and make sure that everything is talking to each other as much as possible. Okay, let's talk about the variables here. We're primarily addressing whether or not having weight on top of your bass drum is going to mess with its resonance, and more specifically, the very low parts of the resonance, which is what viewers have mentioned as being a concern to them about this method, versus either mounting them off of cymbal stands, a snare stand, or just in general, like the sort of virgin bass drum idea, no mounting hardware actually stuck onto or through the shell. Additionally, we set everything up to be as resonant as kind of possible in terms of the toms and the snare drum so that we could measure the crosstalk and see if the kick drum is affecting them more or less based on the structure of the mounting of the rack tom. So our two options today are we put it through the standard mount on the Pearl bass drum. We're using an L-arm and a sort of OG rims mount that I brought today to sort of equalize things. I know that, different mounts mount to rack toms differently, and this is sort of the original suspension mount. And then our secondary situation is just putting it straight into a cymbal stand so there's nothing on the bass drum. We didn't plug the holes or anything like that because this isn't an airflow thing. There's a big hole in the front of the bass drum, so that doesn't really matter. Additionally, I'm going to play the bass drum with the beater coming off for most of this, but in the single hit kind of demonstrations, I'll do a little bit of bass drum beater burying for those of you that play in that manner, so you can see if there's anything going on with that as well. The heads we're using today are clear EC2 batters on the toms, clear G1s on the bottom. The bass drum has an EMAD batter clear, and the front is an EQ3 with a port that we cut in at a pretty large, like a 6-inch port. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to put the rack tom onto the bass drum, mount it that normal kind of way, and we're just going to play some grooves and do some single hits and see if there's any kind of noticeable interaction between them other than what I'm expecting from these drums that I've played a lot of times. They sound, to me, pretty much like they normally sound in here. They're a little extra resonant because of the way that we've tuned them, which was going for that, trying to get the biggest sound that we could out of them. And I'm noticing also that this rims mount is changing the dynamic of this drum a little bit, which just goes to show you that, different suspension mounts are also different. There isn't a best one. They're all totally their own things. But overall, they sound really nice. There's a lot of tone. There's a tremendous amount of crosstalk between the bass drum and the toms, for sure. So we're definitely getting a bunch of resonance out of the bass drum. It's definitely moving a lot of air. Now, in the case of these toms, which is to say a rack tom mounted on the bass drum and then a floor tom that's also mounted on a suspension mount from a cymbal stand, they're hanging out there in the air. The floor tom's close to the bass drum, right by the batter head, so there's a lot of motion there. And this drum is actually on the drum. That brings people into thinking that this is going to somehow activate the rack tom more in terms of crosstalk, and that also maybe the rack tom is going to activate the bass drum in a different way. There might be some kind of interaction between them that's changing the sound of them individually or overall. So we're going to pull it off, put it on a cymbal stand, and find out. Okay, let's talk about this. They sound exactly the same to me. The kick sounds exactly the same, the toms sound exactly the same, and the most befuddling part to us is the crosstalk is exactly the same. And by exactly the same, I mean like the waveforms in Pro Tools look exactly the same. So up front, it doesn't matter. You can put your rack tom wherever you want. You can put it on your bass drum. You can put it on a snare stand. It's really not going to change enough to matter. My immediate takeaway after playing both setups actually had nothing to do with the sound of the rack tom or the sound of the bass drum in terms of the mounting. What I noticed was that the variables in the different strikes from me, a human, hitting a drum with my foot, had way more variation in it just in the course of a groove than the differential between these two sounds. It's virtually immeasurable. Burying the beater and playing off the head is 1,000 times bigger of a sound difference, especially in terms of tone, than whether or not your tom is on the bass drum. Now, as a side anecdote, I have in person seen somebody take a bass drum which had full heads on both sides and maybe like felt strips or something. It wasn't very muffled. And they had me play it, and then they put their body weight around the bass drum and kind of hugged it. Not muffling the heads, but just muffling the shell. That made a different sound. But in terms of a pop kind of bass drum sound where there's muffling and it's meant to be a punchy thump, that's a different scenario where we're really not relying on the motion of the shell as much to make the tone. If you're playing like a big 24 and you're doing a Bonham thing, there might be a difference there. But Bonham also mounted his rack tom off of his bass drum on his Ludwigs. I've seen it. I know that it's true. I mean, you can find it on the internet. So that means to me that that dude had giant tone out of all of his drums, and it was okay for him, so I feel like it can be okay for us too. Now, just sort of for proof of concept, we're going to do back-to-back, boom, 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 boom. Here we go. All right, now, if you're like me and you like to really check these things out and go super deep, and maybe you put on some headphones and you really listened, you're gonna hear some differences between every single one of those examples. And I'm here to tell you that those differences are just me, a person who got up after I played the first stuff, moved some things around, got a glass of water, talked a little bit, sat back down, and played again. And, you know, my feet stretched out a little bit, I moved around. That differential is enough for this to not matter. Like if you're thinking about a set break at a gig, you're playing 2 sets, or maybe there's one song you're not playing on and you go and stand by the bar or, sit at a table or something like that. That's enough to reset these variables a little bit. Never mind that things move while you're playing too, if the bass drum skipped away from you a little bit or something like that. Those are all much, much larger factors than something like this, for sure. And I can imagine a scenario where maybe you're dealing with drums that have very, very thin shells, and maybe you're putting 2 rack toms on an 18 or something like that. I mean, maybe there's a version of this that could be a thing, but you'd have to look pretty hard, and I really don't think it's half as important as something as simple as tuning or stick choice or thinking in terms of the tone that you want to make rather than whether or not your drum is somehow getting in the way of what you're looking for. The real bottom line here for me is that I think that there are variables worth concerning yourself with, and there are variables that are not so important. And thinking about discussion groups and different things online that I've seen where people spend a tremendous amount of time talking about sort of the minutia of mechanical issues like this that seem to be affecting their ability to play and get the sound that they want. If you take that time and just spend it working on getting the sound and understand that unless there's something structurally wrong with your instrument, there's a sound in there that's good and you can find it. But thinking in terms of something like having a tom on your bass drum making your bass drum tone not good, I would really submit that going away from gear choices and brands and ideals of that nature and all of the kind of marketing around it, and think in terms instead of that it's a drum and it's going to make a good sound if you just figure out how to make it make a good sound. And putting a tom on your bass drum is not going to destroy that for you. There's no way. All right, thank you for making it to the end of this pretty chatty odyssey that we had here. We really appreciate it. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the notification button down below so that you can get every notification for every video that we put out. They come out at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time every Tuesday, whether you get a notification or not. And as always, there will be additional content surrounding this on our Patreon, which we have a link below. Please go check it out. It really helps us keep this going and allows us to do other projects that are coming down the pipe that nobody knows about yet that I'm super excited about. Thanks again to ProMark by D'Addario for being our presenting sponsor today. And I would love to hear if you've actually experienced this having an effect on your sound and what the details around that were, because I really couldn't make it do it, and I would love to know what can. So let us know.